So after this very short break, I'm back again. So now I'm following basically following the presentation and the conversation we have today. We're going to talk about the panel. We're going to have the panel now. And we're going to talk about, is advertising dying? Which is probably a bit dramatic. I know it's a bit dramatic, but the idea also was to grab your attention, right? So today with me, I'm going to have Alistair McEwan. Alistair is the Senior Vice President Commercial Development for BBC Advertising. So, yeah, welcome, Alistair. Thank you for being with us today. I also have Ben Crawford. Ben Crawford is the Regional Business Director for IPG Media Brands, Interpublic Group. And I also have Ranji. Ranji, welcome. Ranji is the Marketing Director for the World Federation of Advertisers. Thank you for coming. Okay, so let me very quickly do the introduction about what we are going to talk today. We have 3 very small people with us, so that's going to be great. So is advertising dying? So, and I mentioned that advertising, of course, as we know, is changing. Something is going on, just to say, I don't know if it's dying, but at least something is changing, right? So we know that consumers more and more, and there is more data, like the one I showed so they are less engaged with brands, they are less engaged with content. And actually, a lot of things about what happened this year, right? About, you know, the big marketeers, advertisers questioning what they are doing in digital. So definitely there is something that is changing, or at least is something that has to change. So I'm going to throw like the first question to the group. I think this first one, sorry, I got my notes here. So the first one is for you, Alistair. A lot of data shows that actually TV is still the king, at least in the region, or probably everywhere in the world. So TV is still king, right? It's still showing like good numbers. It's very solid for advertisers to invest. But we know that consumers are watching more online content than ever before, and now we live in like the era of Netflix, right? So what's in the future, what is changing, and what the content is going to look like in this new era of Netflix, digital content, TV content, etc. What is your point of view on that?
Well, I think. Oh, hello.
Yeah, it's right.
Thanks, man. I think the first thing to say is that advertising, I think, has never been stronger, actually, globally. And I think media is evolving. We're clearly seeing a gear change, I think, particularly from the marketing community, who are really starting to question the strategies that they've been employing for the last few years with the rapid rise of digital and the significant, huge shift of consumers to the digital space. But, of course, like everything, there has to be a correction. People are pausing at the moment. People are thinking clearly about what's important to them, what's important to their brands, what's important to their conversion rates, the return on investment that they're applying. Yeah. I think there are some key truisms, though, that we'll see go forward. That is, video is everywhere. What is TV? TV is no longer defined by the linear viewing experience. TV is pretty much everywhere, on every device. Yeah. The content that we consume on linear is the same content that we consume in our catch-up, in our homes, mobile, and our commute daily. So really, we shouldn't be shackled to this definition of TV being an at-home linear experience. It no longer is. The other truism is that really content is only as good as the quality of the content that is produced. And audiences will always aggregate towards great content, great quality content around the world. So if you are in the business of putting out great quality content, and we at the BBC like to think that we are right at the forefront of that experience, whether it's in the entertainment, the drama, the educational space, or indeed the global news space, that is the hallmark of what will bring our audiences to us. It's then about how we then make that content available, how we distribute it across all the different platforms. So for me, is advertising dying? Absolutely not. Is TV dying? Absolutely not. It's evolving, and consumers will stay with us as long as we continue to produce great content.
Good. Thank you. And yeah, I think we all agree, and all of us know when you said that there is more content than ever, and there is a lot of great content, right? But again, we show more and more, and probably, again, as you say, something has to change, right? Is when we think about advertisement, for example, we know that consumers are less and less engaged with advertisement. They say that they're not interested. They're really annoyed based on what they say. So what do you think, Ranji, about it? What's going on with consumers or with the younger generation? Is it something we need to change? If we have great content, but at the same time it says advertising as we know it, consumers are not interested or not that interested, probably.
Well, I think, and I was looking at the data, and I loved the slides you presented. I loved the data in there. I think that same data also told us about a couple of years ago that modern audiences have the attention span of goldfish. Yeah. And we were told that, it had to be all about 7-second vines. 3-second video views counted. Yeah. And what brands did was said, right, let's go forth and produce short, snackable, shareable content. It's got to be all about that. Yeah. And if you take a step back and you look at modern audiences, never before have audiences been so gripped to long-running TV series that go on forever and ages, proving to your point that audiences can stay engaged if you give them great content. They're online watching, gamers gaming at their console, so they can stay stuck to something, but it's engaging enough in their opinion. And they're turning to vloggers for information and education like trusted partners in the way that brands used to be back in the day. Mm-hmm. So if you think about that, you can't get someone to know you in 7 seconds, let alone trust them, trust you enough to part ways with your money, or say, right, I'm going to follow you, brand. So I think it really is moving away from, and it was all about the medium is the message 2 or 3 years ago, and that was what everyone kind of bought into. And there's nothing wrong with the how and the where. But what we're seeing, and we just had a really great session with our CMOs last week, is more brands are moving back towards the fundamentals of your brand message, what you're about, what you stand for, clearly articulating that, and focusing on the audience, who really are we about, and thinking about how we get to them and where we reach them, down the funnel.
So you think that is kind of like, that's also my perception too. I totally agree with what you said. That
oh, good.
That is
good.
So this idea of someone talk about snackable content. Everyone moves into snackable content, and we got a bit trapped as an industry, I think, on the data, right, on the new innovation technology. And there are more things coming, right? If you think about all the things that are coming, like virtual reality, augmented reality, do you think that actually? And this question is for you, Ben. Do you think that this new technology, and technology I mean everything, it's not just that you put in Oculus glasses, but also how you target people on the advance of programmatic, dynamic content, etc. Do you think that is really changing the industry? This is really changing the way we...
I think with data and technology, I think what we've seen over the last few years is people start to get lost in that world. I think content's now consumer-centric, which is great. People are watching more content than ever before, and that's been mentioned. I think data and technology are tools that can be used in really effective ways. Yeah. If you take data to get insights around audiences, around culture, around the right moments to impact consumers, I think it becomes really interesting. When you fuse that with great ideas that can live across platforms, so that we're not starting being digitally first, or we're not starting with the TVC, we're starting with understanding what our brand is, what the great idea is, and then how we can start to take that idea across different platforms. Technology becomes an enabler. You see a lot of brands like Red Bull or Lego, even sporting brands like NBA, that do that really effectively. They understand exactly who their brand is, they have great ideas, they go and execute them through technology, and they back it up through data. So they're talking to people at the right time with the right message. So they're building reach with relevance, which I think is the new game.
That's really interesting. And I like what you said. It's not just about... And that's something I remember we've been fighting a lot, right? Even from the media agency, we used to work together, about not being the TV-centric. But now we move suddenly to the other part of, oh no, you don't have to be, we are mobile first or digital first, and now suddenly we are mobile-centric. But I like what you say, it's like, well, it's not one or the other. It's basically being an idea-centric, right? This is what you said. But Alistair, coming back to you, what, for example, someone like the broadcaster should do? Because we're talking again about content, cross-platform content, which is, and I know more and more like BBC or other broadcasters, you guys are more multi-platform, not just TV. And you said TV is not just the device, it's video that flies everywhere, right? What do we have to do, or what broadcaster has to do to create content, more interesting content to engage consumers? Because yes, consumers are watching content, but how we link our brand to that, how me as a brand, I can create content that is really interesting for consumers. And probably it's difficult to answer the question, I know.
Wow, that's a big question. I think, again, I come back to the fundamental of great quality. That's got to be your benchmark. That's the key objective to start out with. I think at the BBC, the way we're really seeing the gear shift, and particularly in the news production space, which is beforehand we would used to go out and send a foreign correspondent with a film crew, or with a news crew out into the market, and they'd do a stand-up piece to camera, which would distribute that material for a linear-based audience. And we're now seeing that there is a significant shift in the way we produce that type of content. Often we will have a reporter or a correspondent out there just with a camera phone, producing content. We'll then edit and produce that for a mobile audience. That will then get reproduced into a format which is repurposed for sort of linear type consumption habits. So that's just one example. But I think if you think about the types of technology changes that are going on, particularly in the natural history space, for example, if you think about all of the different types of techniques and technology and investment that you have to make into innovating to capture and inspire audiences. And I think, Blue Planet 2, which has just broken globally, is a great example of innovation for a legacy business that has been around, the Natural History Unit of the BBC, for 60 years, and yet they are still at the forefront of innovation. So it's really, investment. It's into technique and advancement in that respect as well.
That's really interesting. So, because you are talking, and I understand it's a difficult balance between the right content, the right idea, and also innovation. But when we show these numbers that show, if you are in your mobile and you don't want to see really content that comes from a brand, you want to see the content that you want to watch at that time, right? Because probably you're in the bus, you're somewhere else that you just want to watch for a few minutes what you want to watch. And you mentioned innovation. Do you think, and that's for you, Ranjit, that you mentioned that you talked the other day to the CMOs and you talked to the marketeers. When they think about innovation, is that something, do they think that innovation is the solution for that? Or do you think, you talk about the content and the quality of content, where do you see them? Because sometimes these marketeers, they move very heavily into innovation and do something new and different. Doesn't matter what. But sometimes it's about, very conservative. Where do you think this innovation world is perceived as from the marketeer's perspective?
So I think too many times innovation has been invariably associated with technology. Innovation must mean tech. It must mean mobile, it's digital. But innovation, I think, can and should mean so many other things. New ways of reaching consumers, just fresh ways of thinking, innovative ideas towards creativity. So I think our marketers looking towards innovative solutions, definitely and absolutely. Do they all have to be digital? No. It could be new platforms, new ways of gauging in-store, retail. So I think innovation goes across everything, not just digital.
Yeah.
And I think to go back, Ben, your point that it has to be good. However we do the innovation or the tech that we use, it must enable, it must illuminate, and not complicate the process unnecessarily.
Good. And I think, and now talking to you, Ben, because we're talking about content, right? And we're talking about good content, as you mentioned. But what is the role of the user-generated content? Because of course, a few years ago was like, user-generated, forget about the rest of the content, it's all user-generated content. And I think we're coming back to quality content after the fake news thing and all this stuff that I'm going to mention here, but all these kind of things that we're coming back. What is the role of the user-generated, from the media agency perspective, or?
I think user-generated content is really interesting in many ways. I think, people tap into a YouTube channel because they're passionate about a certain subject. So they might find that user-generated content an authority in that space, but it's a very particular segment. When you see that collide with the mainstream, you see some really interesting nuances. So PewDiePie and his relationship with Disney didn't last very long.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
when it got opened up to the mainstream, people found him abrasive and offensive.
Yeah.
Where it becomes quite interesting is where you start to see user-generated content influence the mainstream media in bigger pockets. So globally, there's a program called Gogglebox, and it's a TV program about people watching TV, and it's voyeuristic. It's been hugely successful in many countries, hugely influenced by user-generated content. I think the other genre that I'd reference would be esport, where esports moved from being very much inside the YouTube world to being on mainstream free-to-air TV throughout the world.
Yeah.
The danger with user-generated content is before you start partnering with those spaces, you need to understand who you are as a business, because they will be quite brutal in their response if they don't think you've got a part to play in that world.
And that's interesting. Again, this idea of, well, before, talking to consumers, this will be obvious, right? That you need to understand what is your proposition. And that's probably a question for maybe the three of us. I had it just for you, but I think it's interesting. Is that can anyone create, or can any brand create content? Is content, as we know, like quality content, etc., not just a pure TV commercial, of course. I'm not counting the typical advertisement as content right now, and I know that it's difficult to classify, but if we think about this type of content that you mentioned, or the branded content, for example, or user-generated content, if you think about the brands, different brands and categories, is there anything that anyone can do and tap into that? Or do you think like, well, I don't want to mention any names, of course, but it's like something like, well, you probably need to have some criteria before you go into that world. I think we can start with you, Alistair.
Absolutely. It's a great question. Of course, brands can create their own content. The question is, should they? And how well can they produce that content? Our response to this question was to set up our own unit called BBC Storyworks, which we set up 2.5 years ago, which is an in-house creative agency that is driven in the vision and the values of our newsroom. So we produce branded content that we hold to the same standards as all of the editorial that we produce. Now, that doesn't mean to say it's in conflict with that output. It's absolutely complementary to it. So what that means is that we work with brands to try to uncover the underlying value proposition that they're looking to articulate to the audience, and then try to shape ways of telling stories to enable that. And the best outcomes are when we work with brands who allow us to curate their own brand experience in that process and actually encourage them to step out of the way. And really, I think that the trap that we see a lot of brands falling into is where they feel branded content should tell a story about them specifically. To one of your charts earlier, Pablo, consumers aren't interested in brands. They're not interested in really ultimately what you've got to say. What they're interested in is how the experience that they consume makes them feel, and the implicit and explicit sort of benefits that rubs off to the brand. So create great quality viewing experiences, make sure that there is a value transaction, and allow the brand to ride on the coattails of that feeling.
Thank you. And Ranji, I think from the, again, more marketeers, advertisers, what's your point of view? And then what do you think they're thinking about? Is that is something, because when I think about advertisers, sometimes is that content something that is cool and I need to create this, and well, because I have some money left in my media marketing mix and I'm going to invest on that? Or is that something that, do you think all of them are really thinking seriously about creating content?
I agree with quite a few of the points Alistair made, in that you have to really think as a brand, do we need to do this? And understand why you're doing this. And to go back to one of the slides, you mentioned it's about engagement, entertainment, and sometimes education. There is a role for how-to videos, as mundane as they may sound, because sometimes that's what audiences or your consumers need or want from your brand. Not every brand needs to make a Lego movie. If it's right for you, go ahead and pick the right channels. Does your brand really need to be on that social platform if everyone's on it? Do you really need to have pieces of content every day? To what end? So I think it's really thinking about all that, and at the heart of it, knowing what your brand stands for and what you need, what your objectives are, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ben, from the media agency perspective, that you talk to advertisers all the time? What do you think they're asking you?
Look, when I started my career, relationships with media vendors was very much around cost and price. And it was around doing long-term deals, around guarantees up front, around how much it was going to cost over the year and benchmarking that cost. I think more than ever, conversations have very much shifted towards partnership and how you can get more out of that relationship through, leveraging the strengths of vendors, which are very much in the creation of content, and understanding who your brand is when you're talking to that partner and what value they can add. And then obviously, as Alistair mentioned, how you can add value to the consumer. So that's where I think it's heading, and it has been for some time. And I think those conversations are becoming deeper and they're becoming more important.
More important. Right. And I have also, and I mentioned it before, and I think it's great because we have 3 different point of views, let's say, which is fantastic. But I want to come back to this idea of technology, right? Because it's something that, of course, and again, technology, as you mentioned, I think, Ranji, is that technology is a lot of things, right? It could be digital, but could be also something we are, using, or what I mentioned, VR or augmented reality. And then probably, again, a question for the 3 of you, again, and probably we start with you again, Alistair. How do you think technology is shaping or changing the way, we create content? Of course, technology, I think, is changing the way consumers are using content. That doesn't matter, from the smartphone to the now VR or augmented reality. That is starting to move now. It's not, I think, a big thing now. But how do you think, is that something that you guys, for example, at BBC and the publishers, is something that you having a look at it? Or is that something you are, if you think about virtual reality or augmented reality or the next big thing, for example, how do you think this is shaping the content you are creating?
Well, yeah, it's a question that sort of challenges us consistently. I think the challenge that all broadcaster publishers have got is what is the return that we're going to see through that, both in the medium to longer term, and what's the capital investment requirements around that. I think there is no doubt that the augmented and virtual reality experiences that we're seeing sort of at the very early stages at the moment are going to significantly reshape the consumer experience. I think that we're seeing elements of broadcasting or filmmaking, let's put it in that term, are starting to embrace that and demonstrate it. I don't think it's hit that tipping point yet where it's got scale in the market to yet drive the demand, and certainly the consumer technology hasn't hit scale yet. So, in terms of access to that, however, it's expensive. It's seriously expensive to produce not only the hardware and the equipment, but all of the editing, the software, and so there is a tension there, and there is an equation that we all have to make, which is at what stage do we feel that this is a critical requirement. I don't think we're quite there, but I think certainly there is demand on the branded content side, and that's where the innovation sort of battlefront is being drawn.
Cool, thank you. I think we have a couple of minutes left. I have the big question just marking in yellow here, which is, I think we started, and Alistair just started answering that question, and I'm going to ask the 3 of you before we finish. It's like, is advertising dying? And I think I know your answer, but I just want you to elaborate a little bit more. I think, Ranji, I'll start with you. Is advertising dying? It's with everything we're talking about, the changes, etc. Is that something, is advertising dying? Or?
Absolutely not. I think it's a tremendous time for advertising, a great opportunity for us to reinvent what great advertising looks like. And the challenge is, yes, there's a lot more noise than ever before. There's a lot more content, proliferation of channels, choice, and there's a lot competing for the time and attention of consumers, and that's finite. The channels have grown and content has grown, but I only have 24 hours in a day, and there's a lot more competing for my time. But the upside, I think, is if great content stands out now, it's going to be better content than we've seen before. And that, I think, is a real opportunity. And great content will pull away from the flotsam and jetsam of everything else that's out there and really stand out. So I think that's the opportunity for brands.
Thank you. And Ben?
Look, I think there's more content than ever before, and I think there's a huge opportunity for more strategic thinking to come back into agency planning. I speak very much from an agency voice, but I think the art of comms planning got lost for a little while in data and technology. I think stepping everything back to the basics and then using those as tools to fuel how we go to market is a huge opportunity. I think the shape of partnerships will change, the model's going to shift, the way that brands connect is going to continue to fragment and become interesting. But as long as we keep our eye on making sure that we are driving a level of reach with relevance and we're connecting with consumers in the right way, brands will continue to prosper.
Thank you. And Alistair?
Well, I think I suspect we're going to hit a renaissance in creativity. And that's certainly my hope. Because if I sort of look at my own personal experience of what advertising I enjoy watching, and there is so much out there that is absolute rubbish. There is so much that is just kind of, that it gets in your face, that is annoying and disruptive. But there is also a huge amount that is really fun to watch, that excites you, inspires you, delights you, and surprises you. And I think that's the great thing about advertising. So providing that the industry itself continues to embrace those fundamentals of great creativity, what drives the human experience, then I think there is a very rosy future for advertising.
Good, thank you very much. I think we are aligned, which is good. I mean, we came to the same conclusion, obviously. But it's interesting that we came from 3 different point of views, and I think we all agree the opportunity we have, with the great content that is out there. And but I like what we came out with. Okay, I think brands, we need to face it from probably coming back to the fundamentals, right? And thinking about what we are as a brand and how we can connect with consumers, which is obviously the basics of communication and marketing. So thank you very much for the 3 of you. Thank you for your time. I think it's been great to talk to you. And now we will go to the next session. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pablo and his panelists.